This past Sunday, the Toronto Board of Rabbis hosted a study Kabbalat entitled, "Through the Eyes of Your Rabbis, Reflecting on 2 Years of Pandemic." And it was really a wonderful gathering. Perhaps some of you joined us online. There were 7 different simultaneous sessions speaking about different aspects of Jewish communal life over these last few challenging years. Rabbi Spolansky, the current president of the Toronto Board of Rabbis, mentioned in her opening address to this gathering how rabbis, in many ways, have been on the front lines of this pandemic, that rabbis have been, using her words, the shock absorbers of the community, and without much training or an experience, if we're being honest, on how to prepare us for that role. And yet, rabbis are called upon to rise to the occasion again and again. And she concluded with gratitude and admiration for our colleagues here in Toronto and around the Jewish world. So let me begin tonight, following the example of my rabbi and mentor, with a word of gratitude to the leaders of the Jewish people, the rabbis, the cantors, educators, lay leaders, and more. In our Parsha this week, we read about Moses and Aaron and the other Israelites as they journey their way physically and, yes, spiritually through the wilderness. These years in the wilderness are when the Israelite people experience some of their toughest moments. Often they turn to their leadership for guidance, and sometimes their leaders respond with strength, and other times we see that even great leaders have moments of struggle. And in Shmini, now that the sacrificial system is well established, Aaron demonstrates the proper way to complete a sacrifice according to the instructions of God. And after the process is described, 2 of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Abihu, decide to conduct a sacrifice themselves, hoping it will bring them closer to God. And Aaron's sons, however, do not follow God's instructions for their sacrifice, and instead offering, as it is written, a strange fire. And because of this deviation from the very specific laws, God punishes Aaron's sons with death, sending flames to engulf both of them instantly. And this is an incredibly challenging piece of Torah for us to stomach. Immediately following this episode, Moses then tells the people what has happened and reiterates the rules of sacrifice so that an incident like this may never happen again. The Torah then states that Nadav and Abihu's own father, Aaron, was silent. And Aaron's silence is surprising. I've always been bothered by his silence, especially now as a new father. I can't help but make a little exclamation every time my son but bumps his head. And so I'm quite disturbed. Why doesn't Aaron say anything? As one of the foremost leaders of the Israelites at the time, shouldn't Aaron address his people after his son's death, after their error leads to their untimely death, to prevent something from like this happening to other people's children? Throughout this entire journey, Aaron was known to be a speaker. He was a mouthpiece for Aaron. He was a mouthpiece for Moses in times of trouble. Aaron spoke directly to Pharaoh on Moses' behalf when we were back in Egypt. But now, in the wake of his own son's death, he says nothing. What could be the reason for Aaron's silence? According to Rabbeinu Bahia, a 13th century Spanish commentator on the Torah, silence is one of the ways in which Aaron's mourning is expressed. Aaron is silent because he is shocked and he is saddened by the death of his children. The circumstances of their punishment are both harsh and unusual. God punishes Nadav and Abihu not due to them committing a willful sin or any malicious act, but simply because they were trying to reach closer to God and did so in an improper way. It makes sense that Aaron, their father and a priest himself, would be so devastated by their loss that he was unable to speak. Aaron's silence shows that even leaders, full of strength and charisma and chutzpah, are not immune to emotion, to being traumatized, or to finding themselves for a loss of words. Too often, we are faced with situations that defy responses. And as Jews, we turn to our family, we turn to our friends, our rabbis, our cantors, our counselors, to speak about traumatic or difficult experiences that we face in our lives. And in times of crisis, it is natural to turn to the leadership in our lives for help. And Shemini reminds us that leaders can also experience trauma. In every negative story or traumatic event experienced by the Jewish people, it is often our community leaders that are hit hard, feeling like they need to support the whole world on their shoulders. So I recognize that me sharing this with you may sound as though I'm suggesting that the struggles of rabbis and Jewish communal leaders are somehow greater than others. That is not what I mean to convey. Only rather that those who often considered to be ever resolute are also vulnerable to the human condition, that we bear the heaviness of our own pain together with the communities. And perhaps this is not the most glorious conversation to be had on Shabbat, but I find it important to name and to consider. When the war struck Ukraine, rather than fleeing a perceived safe zone, one rabbi and his spouse stayed put, and they turned the synagogue into a place of refuge for those whose homes had been destroyed and had no access to food or water. Another rabbi, trained to lead her people in ways of worship and life cycle events, instead led her people through the wilderness to physical safety as refugees from their homeland. This rabbi, too, lost everything in her exodus out from the war-torn land. Yet her place was to be a strong leader for her community. Rashbam, the 11th century French commentator, the grandson of Rashi, states that after the death of Aaron's sons, Moses instructed Aaron, "Do not desist from carrying on with your priestly duties. Even when pained and mourning, it is still Aaron's responsibility to lead." And after this event, Aaron continues to be a strong priest for the Israelites. But that does not change the fact that in the moments directly after that tragedy of losing his children, Aaron needed nothing but silence. Aaron needed to accept and to process that he was in pain before he could properly move on. And in our lives, it is important to remember that everyone experiences hardship, that the strongest leaders are not emotionless, nor should they be, nor do we want them to be. Experiencing our emotions does not diminish leadership, but rather strengthens. Being a deeply feeling person demonstrates the empathy, the resilience, and the wisdom necessary to see our community through tough times. And these are tough times. So may we always have leaders in our midst that are not simply strong, but fully human. And may we respect their humanity as well. Shabbat Shalom.